You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Solana, Doge, and more. Cryptocurrencies and digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity, provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments throughout the world's leading crypto derivatives markets. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of crypto derivatives. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means we are back. It is Monday. It is time once again for the Crypto Rundown. My name, of course, Mark Longo from theoptionsinsider.com. Reminding you of a couple of things right here at the top of the show. A, if you're not listening to the full network, what are you doing? Missing out on nearly a dozen other programs coming at you throughout the week. B, of course, if you want to go above and beyond, you want to get access to awesome pro Q&As and exclusive pro podcast feed, options oddities, all sorts of fun. theoptionsinsider.com/pro is the place to go to learn more as we learn who's joining us on the old Crypto Rundown today. Please welcome back on our old pal, Mr. Greg Magadini from Amberdata. Mr. Greg, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you, Mark. Happy to be here.
How are things in Amberdata land these days?
Well, lots of exciting stuff, of course, with the IBIT options. We got all that data going, so that's been a fun time. And then we have some altcoin volatility models that we built with our friend Ewan Sinclair. Just did a little expose of that with CoinDesk last week, so that's very exciting. We have some DeFi protocols who are going to launch some of these DeFi options, and it's going to be an interesting sort of new segment to the market. And then obviously we had the nice 100K spot Bitcoin last week, which was a monumentous event for everyone, of course.
Yeah, that was a big one. So let's get to it, listeners. It is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trending activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, listeners, let's get to it. A little bit of the old BTC breakdown, where we break down all the action in the world's leading digital asset. Yep, it is the big dog, which is Bitcoin, which is looking bigger now than it was on our last show. We were 95,774 at the end of our show last week. This week, 97,255 when we kicked off the show, up nearly 1,500 handles, 1,481 to be precise, since our last show. Of course, as Greg alluded to, though, we hit a big level in the interim since our last show. a level people have been watching for some time. We flirted with it, kissed it late November after the election. Then it seemed like the bloom had come off the rose and we were selling off away from it again. Then we started rallying, started getting a little bit more effervescent out there. Finally broke through it last week. It was on Wednesday into Thursday after our show last week where we broke that magical, that mythical 100K level. Got up to around 103 and change, maybe a little higher, depending on which venue you looked at, listeners. And then kind of came back off, listeners, back down to where we are right now, 97,000 range. So we briefly flirted with the sun and then now have retreated, but just a little bit. We'll see if the next leg up leads us higher or indeed leads us lower. But Greg, let's start there. It obviously was a big psychological level. A lot of people have been talking about since Bitcoin really captured a lot of mainstream prominence back in the 2017 timeframe with the launch of the futures. Everyone's been talking about Bitcoin 100K. Seemed like a distant goal not that long ago. And now here we are breaking through it. What were your thoughts as we hit that seminal level, sir?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things to look at in the sort of CeFi world where we can see futures liquidations and things like that. So actually, we had a massive, $50 million of liquidations across the board on the upside move past 100,000, and then we had briefly right after we had a crash move back down to call it 91,000 ish. That also liquidated a bunch of longs. So shorts got liquidated on the way up, longs got liquidated on the way down. So we had quite a range in about a 2-day span. We went round trip from 90K or 92K to about 104 back down to 92 in a quick fashion. So a lot of gamma there. So that was kind of something interesting and really proves, when you have these big levels, people are positioned long and short around it. And so we saw a big battle there. But what's interesting is, how did implied vol react? And so implied vol had, a pretty sharp move to about 73 on, say, the 7-day maturity. So it went from, call it 45 up to, about 50 up to 73, back down to 50 pretty quickly. So in my mind, that's kind of showing the hand of what vol is going to do when we have those big moves like that, big gamma moves. What did vol do? It gave us a top, like a local top. So that's kind of the level that I'm looking at in terms of, if I go out the term structure and I can sell 73 vol and we're in this contango environment, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that immediate sell-off right after we broke through the 100K level. You're right, all these signals triggered, and we just saw massive liquidations. It seemed to spook some folks. Did that spook you, sir, or were you kind of expecting some people to hit the exit point once we hit that 100K level?
Yeah, I think it's not like necessarily predictable, but I don't think it's surprising. When people got really levered long through that 100K level, it was a good trading zone. There's a lot of people trading that area, looking at that area. So there's great opportunities for scalps and trades and stuff like that. And so what people do is to get levered long, which makes the market more fragile. And to have a shakeout on the way back down sort of makes sense to me. So I think that was a nice sort of market clearing event, so to speak, to create a nice fresh reset in terms of leverage in the system. And so it's kind of what we've seen in massive bubble-like bull runs. I'm not saying we're in a bubble, but just like those types of very sharp moves one way, you'll have sort of those liquidation clearing events.
Let's see how it's all playing out from a vol perspective as we're kicking off the show here. And, if you ran these numbers right now, listeners, and compared them to where we were a week ago, which is exactly what we're doing here on the show right now, you'd think nothing really happened in the intervening period between last week and this week, let alone that we broke through a pivotal level like 100K, came crashing back down the other side, and then kind of rallied back a bit out there. So right now, looking at the weekly vol, it's almost exactly where it was a week ago. 53 1/3 on the show last week, 54 3/4 this week. So getting a little bit frothier, but nothing really to write home about there. 30-day vol, a more standardized volatility metric, listeners, almost exactly unchanged from where it was a week ago. We were at a 55 on the show a week ago, 55.2 today. And bringing up the rear, the 6-month vol, what are the hodlers up to? Listeners, they're pretty much hanging out as well. 59 even on the show last week, 59.65 this week. So yeah, Greg, you'd be forgiven for a lot of the listeners of the show that is tuning in week on week to think, last week kind of a boring week, Greg.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of mean reverting vol in sort of a close where you open type of thing. So yeah, it's misleading if you just look at the week over week move, because all the intra week had a lot of exciting things in it.
A lot of fun popping off on Wednesday and Thursday, listeners, but kind of settling out now. We're seeing the same thing on the skew front, listeners. The weekly skew was nearly a positive 2 on the show last week, about 1 3/4. This week, close to flat, about a negative 0.3. So not much really going on the weekly skew. And 30-day skew, we were looking pretty bullish last week, positive 5. This week, pretty much cut in half, about positive 2 1/4 on the show right now. And going out 180 days, not much cooking there either. 5.5 on the show last week, 5.7 this week. So after all of our tumult over the past week, Mr. Greg, our skew is kind of settling out and not really pointing in either direction right now, sir. What are your thoughts?
Yep, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's kind of a nice pause in the trend right now. So pause in the vol trend, so a little bit of a relaxation. 100K was the target. We got there. Where do we go from here? Do we pull back more like we've been so far today, or do we push through and trade higher? So I think the skew is kind of pricing that, it could go either way. So it makes a lot of sense to me. And then some of the sort of the bigger themes that we've been seeing are finally relaxing. One theme, for example, is the MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy had so much implied vol to it. Finally, that's coming off. And again, that's a lot of the implied vol supports the strategy of raising convertible bonds at 0% rates, because the conversion has an embedded option, and the high volatility environment makes that valuable. Well, now we're relaxing there as well. So I think this is a very kind of interesting pause post longs and shorts being liquidated. Makes a lot of sense.
Well, at the top of the show, you mentioned the elephant in the room, especially from a crypto options perspective. It is IBIT. It is here to stay now, baby. And looking frothy again, 55.60. It's up about $1.25 from where it was this time last week. Of course, not its pretty much all-time high, which it hit this time last week, as you would expect, as Bitcoin broke through 100K. We got to 59.16 on the upside before coming back down and hanging out at about 55, actually giving up some more since the show started, down to about a 55.12 right now. So off almost exactly $4 from the high. Interesting stuff out here in IBIT land. The ADV kind of treading water right now after we saw this explosion of paper early on. It got up to about 330,000 contracts last week, coming back down to about 321 right now. Still very frothy. There's a lot of options products that would kill to put up 300,000+ contracts a day. And today, it seems like it's not going to hit that. But again, we got a little bit more time in the session. As we came into the start of the show, we had about 200,000 contracts on the tape. As we've been talking for a little bit, we're up to about 222,000 contracts right now. Still about 100,000 to go to hit its ADV. Not sure we're going to get there today, but still looking pretty frothy. 30-day vol also kind of treading water, which is kind of what we'd expect given what we just talked about with the Deribit vol numbers there, listeners. At about a 60, that puts it up about 1.5 points from where it was this time last week. But Greg, we've had a few more weeks under our belts with IBIT options since the last time you and I chatted. What's catching your eye in the world of IBIT, sir?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that's very interesting is just the overall level of volatility. So if I look at, for example, the term structure on IBIT, let me just pull up the latest numbers real quick. So let's see here. So if I'm looking at the term structure, I'm seeing, the 252-day or like the 1 year leap or 6 month leap out at 71.73 vol, the 2 year at 71 vol. If we're looking at the realized vol of Bitcoin over the past few years, well, long dated vol has kind of a median of around 52. So obviously we've had a big move up to 100K, but can we really sustain that 72 vol over the next 2 years on average when sort of median vol is more around the in the 50 handle. I think that's something that's really interesting. So there's just interesting structures to be done there, such as, a simple buy IBIT, sell the covered call on IBIT, and capture some of that vol premium. I think vol came out hot out of the gate, and I do think we're going to kind of resettle lower here. A lot of that we've been waiting on, SEC appointment, the move to 100K, what's going to happen in terms of regulation, things like that. Well, those unknowns became knowns now. And so I definitely think we could see lower vol going forward here to something that's more typical in terms of the realized space.
We were all excited last time you joined us about having IBIT options available to us finally. Have you found yourself slinging them at all, sir? Or are you still going to your crypto degenerate products like your BitXs and your MSTUs?
Yes, I am definitely putting on some trades on IBIT. Very, very happy to have this clean product. You can see the spreads on IBIT are so much tighter than they are on BitX or BitO or any of those other products. So it's a really nice product to trade. Absolutely.
Let's see what's trading out here, shall we, listeners? In terms of what's open for size, it's still the same position that was pretty much since it launched. Back on November 27th, someone put up a whole bunch of the Jan 54 reversal conversions. Like they did it for about 53 cents. They did it quite a few times, listeners. That is still the top positions, 85,000 roughly each of the Jan 54 puts and calls. Reversal conversion, obviously a synthetic, listeners, done puts and calls on the same strike, buying one, selling the other, done to pretty much put on a synthetic underlying position. In this case, they did it for 53 cents. If you're not familiar with that kind of terminology, by all means, check out our shows like Options Bootcamp. Will get you up to speed pretty fast out there, listeners. But that is still the paper that's dominating the tape out here. You got to go all the way down to, looks like number 4, 37,000 of the Jan 63 calls to see any other, I won't call it organic positioning, but at least maybe not just straight synthetic positioning out here. There is a lot of that still in IBIT. In terms of what's going on out there today, listeners, looks like the big dog today are the D62 calls going up. They had gone up about 8,300 times when we kicked off the show. Let's see if any more have gone up since then. Yeah, about the same thing. 62 calls going up today. Let's see, what are they trading? These are expiring on the 27th, by the way, listeners. So pretty much an end of year call, which, if you've been listening to this show for a while, that's the way a lot of the OI tends to line up as well in terms of expiration over there on Deribit. A lot of end of month and end of year type positioning here. But we got 7,400 of the D62s going up today, expiring on the 27th for, looks like, $1.10. Looks like paper bought those against, it looks like, oh, you know what? As I was just saying, our organic positioning looks like that's the 54 strike they rolled up from. So it looks like they could be moving their synthetic up to another strike out there. But that's kind of your leading positioning out here in IBIT. Everyone's been talking about, is IBIT going to be the death of BitO? Well, let's go find out, shall we, listeners? BitO right now, 25 even, up about 40 cents from where it was this time a week ago. The ADV starting to come back down a little bit, 203, down about 19,000 from where it was this time a week ago. But then again, we saw IBIT coming down about 9,000 as well. I'd hardly call 203,000 contracts a day a dead product. Putting up, let's see, they had done about 62,000 contracts as of the start of the show. They're up to about 68,000 now. So again, seems like a bit of a quiet day on the crypto front. Not exactly lighting up the tape from a overall options volume perspective. The vol in BitO at a 58, down about 2 points out here. Mr. Greg, anything catching your eye in the world of BitO these days, or are you all IBIT all the time?
Yeah, I'm definitely shifting towards IBIT in terms of liquidity. I think the liquidity is just so much better. But what is interesting about BitO is, let's remember, it uses the CME futures, and then BitX is to 2 times BitO. And so if you are long a CME future right now, if you're in the front month contracts, you're paying 12% annualized basis, or a 12% premium annualized over spot. So it's a 12% basis. And Ethereum, the basis is between 13% on the front month and 17% on the next month out. So again, that's a lot of carry being priced into the futures position. So think about a 15% bleed in the product. And then if you look at the 2x product, well, then do 2x that bleed. So that's a very interesting sort of drag on the ETFs to keep in mind. And so if you want to own some IBIT but sell some covered calls on some BITO, that could be kind of interesting.
Speaking of selling covered calls, looks like we might have some of that going up in your favorite product out here. Forget about BITO. You're all about BitX, Mr. Greg, a.k.a. the 2X levered product at about a 58.85 right now. Listeners, selling off a bit today, off about 640 or nearly 10% just today out here. So a bit of a wild ride out. BitX not lighting the world on fire from an overall volume perspective, but the big dog today, the D70 calls expiring this week. Looks like paper overriding those for $1.10. Now, worth noting, there are some existing positions open on that strike, so they could be closing, but doesn't seem like it because it looks like the earlier positioning was overriding as well. It's like they overrode them, I should say, a few days ago as well for about $1.45. So it looks like somebody aggressively blasting away at the 70s expiring this week for prices from about $1.10 to $1.45. Mr. Greg, you like that one? You like aggressively overriding a weekly call in BitX, sir? And what else is catching your eye in your beloved BitX?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a product to override on, it's definitely BitX. I think the short-dated stuff doesn't have as much of an opportunity to capture sort of those bigger trends, drag, futures decay, and stuff like that. But, let's keep in mind, short term, I think that 100,000 mark is going to be a little bit of a magnet. So I could see realized coming down over the next week or so. And I could definitely see implied being kind of a decent sell here for sure.
And since we're talking levered products solely for degenerates, listeners, if you're not in the crypto derivatives degenerates camp, maybe just plug your ears. Get the kids away from the speakers right now because this product, not for the faint of heart, listeners. Of course, I'm talking about Greg's beloved MSTU. It was at 140 and a quarter just earlier today, right before the show. And right now it's dropping again to about 137.09. So it's dropped almost $3, over $3 actually, since we kicked off the shows. This thing's just kind of fallen out of bed out there today, listeners. The ADV about 10,000 contracts. It had already put up about 10,000 contracts as we kicked off the show. Let's see, it's up to about 12,000 now. So actually putting up some paper out here in MSTU. And Greg, the top trade out there today in MSTU, this one will bring a smile to your face, I think. Because on the surface, it looks ridiculous. Then you realize, oh yes, I'm talking about MSTU, so maybe no price is too ridiculous. They traded the 125 puts expiring on January 3rd. So these are on the weeklies right at the start of the year. You're not even going out a full month, Greg. And looks like they traded on the bid for $18.17. Actually, through the bid. The market they got was atrocious, $18.20 at $21.60. But then again, it is MSTU after all, listeners. So I guess these were openings. I guess if you're looking for a little bit of yield, Greg, how about selling the 125 puts expiring in about 3 weeks for a whopping $18.17? Does that float your boat?
I'd actually be more likely a buyer than a seller on that thing. I understand the high level of premium, but MSTR has had a huge move, and MSTU is 2 times the MSTR. If I'm looking at sort of that 21-day vol or 25-day vol, you're looking at a 220 vol range. And if you're looking at a term structure, you can see sort of the 63 days out being sort of peaking out in terms of vol. So you have a hump-like structure, and then it comes off, and you can see vol as high as 250%. I think something to keep in mind is I believe we're going to see if we get the MSTR inclusion into the index this week. So we'll see how that goes. That could be a huge sell the news type of event, or if there's a sort of a potential rejection, well, that will definitely be sell the asset type of event. Let's keep in mind, MSTR has a huge net asset value premium over the Bitcoin in its balance sheet. And so if we actually have sort of a pullback in crypto, MSTR should perform down to the downside, or underperform. It should crash more than the rest of the market. And MSTU by association will do 2 times worse. So I could easily see any type of downside moves bring MSTU down 50% to like the 60 or 70 handle. I don't know if it's going to happen in 3 weeks, but I wouldn't put it out of the cards.
I could see why you want to buy those, Greg, because those puts were sold earlier this morning when MSTU was 159.13. As we talked about it, it was 137, almost even. So it sold off over 22 points since they sold those puts. So yeah, given that kind of move, yeah, you might want to be a buyer of those puts. My goodness. Again, this product, not for the faint of heart, listeners. If you are even remotely tentative about slinging crypto derivatives, do not start with MSTU. Definitely a product you might want to work your way up to, or if you want to avoid it completely, I wouldn't hold it against you either, listeners. Just madness afoot. After talking about that product, I don't know what can hold a candle to that. We might have to just be done with the show, listen. It certainly seems like a bit of a come down. Maybe we'll use it as a palate cleanser, listeners, to talk about all things Mara, listeners. It seems relatively staid by comparison. My goodness, it's not moving 20 handles at a clip, at least not right now. 24 even, down about 65 cents from where we talked about it last week. We talked about Mara a bunch of times, vacillating to the upside, vacillating to the downside. 30 usually to the upside, 15 roughly to the downside, hanging out at about 24 right now. That ADV, though, looking explosive. 542,000 contracts a day. It's up another 51,000 since last week. Again, you're starting to talk, and not quite VIX. VIX is in the 750 or so range, but you're starting to threaten that, listeners, in terms of serious paper out here. And today, doing 341,000. The vol out there, if you're wondering, listen, this vol, talk about cratering. It was a 127 on the show last week. It's an 80 even right now, down 47 points, the vol. So I guess Mara, not exactly for the faint of heart either, even if it is no MSTU, but then a few products are, listeners. Greg, anything catching your eye in your beloved but comparatively staid Mara, sir?
Yeah, well, I think Mara, as recently announced, maybe they'll put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. It's kind of starting a corporate trend that allocation to the balance sheet of Bitcoin that MSTR started. So if that was a source of vol for MicroStrategy, could be a source of vol for Mara. We'll kind of see how that plays out. And then we're seeing other firms talk about the same thing. So is this the catalyst for continued higher Bitcoin prices, or is this a bit priced in? And if these companies actually do this, does it translate into higher realized and implied vol like it did for MicroStrategy? I think those are kind of all interesting questions. But overall, it kind of feels that the next week or so is going to be a little bit of a calm down in the crypto vol market. So that's kind of the read that I'm getting right now.
Well, while we're all calming down from the madness that is MSTU, listeners, let's keep on rolling to explore the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, the portion of the show where we break down everything outside of the big boy, which is Bitcoin, except for right now when we're talking about market cap. And man, it has been a slugfest yet again to the downside here from an overall market cap perspective, listeners. The bottom half of our top 10. It's always a battle royale down there. Last week we had Avalanche fighting its way to the number 10 spot with 19.6 billion worth of market cap. Man, we have jumped up quite a bit this week. Also kicking Avalanche to the curve. Tron saying, give me that number 10 spot this week, listeners. Greg's beloved Tron, 25.3 billion worth of market cap for the number 10 spot. So that is an enormous move. You're talking not quite 6, but pretty close. 5.7 billion worth of market cap. That's a lot. Cost less than 10 billion to break into the top 10 not too long ago, listeners. Give you a sense of how much valuations have moved. The rising crypto tide lifting all boats. Number 9, we got Cardano. So Cardano managing to hold on to its spot in the top 10, but dropping a slot from number 8 last week to number 9 this week. 38.9 billion worth of market cap. Also losing a little bit of its market cap from last week as well. Number 8, USD coin, 40.75 billion. Number 7, Greg's beloved Doge, 63.8 billion. Number 6, BNB, 103.2 billion. Number 5, it's Solana, 106.25 billion. Number 4, XRP, holding firm around that 241 level after spiking. 241, that gives it a market cap of 137.8 billion. Listeners, number 3, it's Tether, 138 even, so XRP and Tether fighting neck and neck for that number 3 spot. Number 2, it's ETH, 461.4 billion, and the big dog, BTC, 1.9 trillion worth of market cap. Listeners, that's serious business, threatening 2T. That's wild stuff. Is ETH following suit, listeners? Is ETH delivering the wild stuff? Well, let's go out here and see. On our show last week, 3607. Coming into the start of the show this week, 3826. Puts it up 219 handles on the week. Greg, one of the talking points you and I have been talking about for a while, seems like a lot of the crypto space is running with this as well, has been the relative underperformance of ETH. Seems like it kicked it into higher gear the last couple of weeks, trying to play a little bit of catch up. What's been catching your eye in the world of ETH recently, sir?
Yeah, well, I think last week the outperformance in ETH, or the relative performance in ETH, was really kicked off by the appointment of Paul Atkins as the SEC. So Atkins is essentially regulatorily friendly towards crypto. This is really important for ETH because a lot of the ETH value comes from projects being built on top of Ethereum. We're talking about NFT projects, we're talking about gamified token projects, we're talking about DeFi projects. ETH has a direct mechanism for transaction fees reducing the float of Ethereum. And so each time there's more projects and more utilization on the Ethereum platform, it actually reduces the supply, which actually increases the dollar price of ETH. Now, there's a second unrelated problem, and I know I've talked about this before, but maybe listeners haven't heard this. Layer 2s are being built on top of Ethereum. So those are essentially their own blockchain that's settled back to Ethereum. So you do all the transactions off of Ethereum, and every hour or every period you get to take the state and settle it to Ethereum. And so what happens there is that the amount of transactions goes down a lot. And because the amount of transactions has gone down a lot, the fee burn mechanism hasn't been utilized as much. So those are kind of two competing narratives. But overall, deregulation is going to be even better for Ethereum than it is for Bitcoin, because so much of Web3 relies on a friendly crypto regulatory environment. So I think that was the backdrop to this outperformance we saw last week.
A lot of ETH fans in our audience are certainly hoping that is indeed the case, that ETH can play a little catch up. Indeed, go beyond. Did it go beyond since our last show? Got north of 4K. That was nice to see again, even though I'm not holding it right now. So as Bitcoin hitting new all-time highs, ETH not quite at a new all-time high, but starting to become reminiscent of levels we saw a few years back. What's going on from a vol perspective out here in ETH, listeners? And again, you'd be forgiven if you just ran these numbers for thinking not a heck of a lot happening in between the shows. Weekly vol, looking at Greg's platform here, listeners, was a 74 on the show last week, 72.75. So not a heck of a lot of evolution there. We were at a 71 on the show last week on the 30-day, so the monthly vol. About a 70.25 this week. So again, not a heck of a lot of evolution. And going out all the way 6 months, 69 on the show last week, 69.7 this week. So again, you'd be forgiven for thinking, Greg, that if you just looked at the vol numbers show to show, Greg, ETH kind of a snooze fest over the past week, sir.
Right. I think, if what's really interesting is for all of 2023 and part of 2024, we've had essentially volatility parity between Bitcoin and ETH. Now there's a premium again in Ethereum, implied 15 vol points above Bitcoin, especially in the backdated stuff. What's really interesting, though, is if you look at the realized volatility of the Ethereum versus Bitcoin ratio, obviously Ethereum and Bitcoin are highly correlated assets, so they should move together in lockstep. Well, right now, the ratio close to close realized vol is 57. So that says a lot. And so as we get a little bit of a ETH relative outperformance and the ratio bounces from, say, 0.032 to 0.04, you're getting expansion and vol on the way up. So I think that's a good sign. And so hopefully we can get through at least new 2024 all-time highs by the end of the year. if not, new 2024 highs, if not all-time highs, over the the next month or so.
Let's crunch a little bit more data in here in ETH, listeners, and we'll get out to the rest of the altcoin universe, see what's lighting up Greg's wallet this week. Skew-wise, listeners, a little bit of a different story from the vol picture. We're seeing skew give up the ghost a little bit this week. It was looking pretty positive even at the end of our show last week. We had about a positive 4.7 on the weekly front on the show last week. This week, listeners, swinging the other way down to a negative 1.5. So again, we hit that 4,000K level, got above it, came back below it. Not surprising to see the skew reflecting that. Seeing something similar in the monthly skew, about a 5.3 on the show last week. This week, 1.3. So coming in pretty much exactly 4 points. And going out to the 6-month skew, listeners, positive 6.2 on the show last week. This week, about 5 3/4. So giving up almost half of a point. Greg, anything catching your eye on the ETH skew front this week?
I think right now, really what's interesting is if I look at sort of the longer dated stuff, you have this positive skew. I think that's really essentially pricing in that, if we're going to get some vol outperformance to Ethereum, it's likely going to be to the upside. I think that's pretty interesting. So if I wanted to own some ETH volatility, essentially, I definitely think the longer term trend is probably going to be a rotation from Bitcoin to altcoins, and therefore you should get a little bit of that beta outperformance in Ethereum as sort of a general long term trend. So therefore, 6-month options, 1-year options are going to kind of reflect that. Short term, obviously, the pullback makes it a nice negative skew. But I think long term that upside skew is justified, and I definitely could see Ethereum definitely hold out that to be true, especially if we get that altcoin rotation.
Speaking of the altcoins, let's explore a few more of them here, listeners. Solana, the big rival for the ETH throne, listeners, not doing a heck of a lot in the intervening, at least net show on show. 222 and roughly 3/4 is where it was the end of our show last week, about 223 1/4 when we kicked off the show this week. So net up about half a buck out there. XRP, as you mentioned, it got up to about almost 2 3/4 on the show last week. I think it got a little higher in between that. 242 when we kicked off the show. So still frothy, but giving back some of those lofty levels. Greg, the big XRP fan that he is, I'm sure we won't be surprised by that. Doge, 42.3 cents last week, 43.4 cents. So gaining a whopping 1.2, or actually 1.1 cents on the week. Litecoin, 126.95 last week, 122.40 this week. It's giving up a little over $4.50. Cardano, 119 last week, 111 this week, so giving up a whopping 8 cents. Polkadot, 906 on the show last week, 955 this week, gaining 49 cents. And everybody's favorite, the mighty Shiba Inu, pretty much treading water. 1,000,000 zeros, 2931 last week, this week 2979. So not a heck of a lot of evolution out there as well. No Shiba Lambos for you folks out there this week. Greg, anything lighting up your tape, or indeed, I should say, lighting up your wallet out there in the altcoin universe right now?
Yeah, well, I think it's very interesting to look at XRP. Obviously, there's a massive call skew on XRP. If you look at the options on Deribit, you're kind of looking at 20 vol points to the call side. And then if we're looking at just the outright vol, call it 150 to 200, depending on the maturity. And so I wouldn't be interested in selling that. But what I think is interesting is this type of move where we've just gone into like a vertical candle higher where the price is essentially just 5x'd with not a lot of trading in between. I don't view that as a very constructive type of trend. There wasn't a lot of like price validation along the way. It's almost just kind of like gapping up. So we've seen this with XRP in the past. It's almost like a calling the top type of indicator. I hope that's not the case. Obviously, there's a lot of moving parts with the new administration, and so maybe it is justified. But I definitely think that's kind of an interesting asset to look at, and options are probably the way to trade that thing, because you want to at least protect yourself on the downside. Or if you're going to own XRP, maybe you can harvest some cover call yield, things like that. But overall, this is it's kind of a hard asset to trade.
You're going to make me look at the options numbers for XRP, aren't you? I just joked about it with you not too long ago when the stock was 52 cents. Who needs the options? But now you're going to make me go dig it up. Luckily, you have all the data for us there, Mr. Greg, over there on Amberdata. So if I was so inclined, sir, to look up how many $2.58 strike options are open, if you're wondering, listeners, 371,000 right now. Yeah, I could do so over there on Amberdata. But I'm not going to do it, Greg, because I'm not going to get sucked down the rabbit hole of XRP options. I know it's your favorite. I know you love it, Mr. Greg, but yeah, it's just wild to me. How long were we talking about XRP options when it was hanging out at 50 cents, seemingly forever, right? It didn't seem like an asset that really necessitated an options market. You could have bought all the permanent calls you wanted, listeners, for 55 cents. So interesting to see folks slinging the upside now for more than that. When you're right, maybe it might be interesting. I'll have to look at the liquidity and everything else here. But it might be interesting for some upside verticals, maybe, Mr. Greg, out here. Folks are really going to bid up the nonsense to XRP. But that's a conversation for another day. That music, listeners, means we've come to the end of another episode of the Crypto Rundown. But before we go, Mr. Greg, you mentioned you're putting out some interesting new altcoin models. What else is cooking in the land of Amberdata that the folks can check out, sir?
Yes, absolutely. So you guys can come out and check out the platform, pro.amberdata.io. You can see all the vols on Deribit, all the vols on our favorite products like IBIT, BitX, MicroStrategy. You can check out the vols on DeFi protocols like Derive and see where their Bitcoin vol and ETH vol is trading, and their soon-to-be altcoin vol is trading as well. So that's the place I would recommend to go visit, pro.amberdata.io. If you'd like to hear about our weekly recap of the crypto vol market, you can go to amberdataderivatives.substack.com. And then lastly, you can check out our website at amberdata.io.
There you go, listeners. A lot of great data waiting for you, including the GUI completely for free. You can go check it out. So if you want to see a lot of these numbers we're talking about on the show for yourselves, see how they're lining up, maybe use it to inform your own trading. Amberdata.io, the place to go to begin your journey to the dark side. That's going to do it for us on our journey today. Of course, back again with our usual array of content throughout the week, listeners, until we're back again next Monday with another episode of the Crypto Rundown. Stay safe out there, everybody.
The Crypto Rundown is brought to you by Amberdata. If you're entering the digital asset class, you'll need access to granular on-chain and market data from multiple venues to power research, trading, risk management, and compliance. Amberdata delivers comprehensive data and insights into blockchain networks, crypto markets, and decentralized finance, empowering financial institutions to apply traditional finance methods to digital assets. Amberdata eliminates the infrastructure setup, integration challenges, and maintenance headaches to access digital asset data, reducing cost and time to market to enter the digital asset class. Learn more and download their digital asset data guide at www.amberdata.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.